So we've got two adults that we're really learning about. How do I be in relationship with this person? How am I responded to? When I reach out, do they reach back for me? And, energetically, when I have a bid
Mm,
for connection, do they look at me when I ask for something? Am I annoying to them or am I loved? And so we're really learning about who am I in the world? Am I worthy of being loved? Am I worthy of being attended to? Or am I an annoying person? Or do I deserve to be um, neglected and ignored? Right? Because
mm,
children don't are not able to consider, okay, dad is really stressed at work and has absolutely no capacity for any children. And it doesn't matter that it's me or it could be the most angelic child on the planet. He would
mm,
be exactly the same, right? Children
mm,
can't think like that. So they internalize it and they say, oh, it's me. Dad's left because of me. Dad's sad because of me. So there's a
mm.
whole period for children where developmentally that's how they feel and think.
Cause everything feels bigger. It's all fire and little stones become boulders when they're held for long enough. Skipping stones across that river.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You are listening to Don't Be Afraid to Talk podcast with James. I believe if we are going to affect change, we must go back to the basic, which for me, in essence, is conversations. Talking and listening is key for growth, and I hope our stories will bring us together and we can draw inspiration from each other. Conversation will include topics such as mental and physical health, trauma and its effect, suicidal thoughts, recovery, and well-being. We will continue to raise awareness and offer a different perspective, a mindset, or an idea that could inspire you to take charge of your well-being and to grow as a human being. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask the Therapist. Today I'm joined by Jennifer, who's a clinical psychotherapist and energy healer who's based in Sydney, Australia. And today we're going to be discussing father wounds. If you're listening, have an open mind, and we hope you can learn something from this episode. Jennifer, how are you?
I'm great, James. Great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Thank you for coming on. And can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, so I got into my line of work through my own healing work. I found that in my early 20s, I was struggling with something in my own life where I needed help. And so I started to study alternative therapies and I started to see actually an energy healer who I started to work with. And yeah, I basically started doing healing work of different kinds, mostly on myself. And then it was so interesting for me. I thought, okay, let's go and study some more of this. So I did
Mm,
quite a lot of studying in the area of, I did lots in the alternative therapy space. And then
mm,
later on, I moved into psychotherapy. So then trained in now I'm a clinical psychotherapist. And also I've got a lot of qualifications in different kinds of energy healing. So my passion really is bringing
mm.
those two worlds together because I find that they're so complementary. And yeah, the
They
psychological
are.
world and the energy world are
Mm,
very
mm.
interrelated.
They are. And I think for some people that practice one, obviously you advocate for the one you practice, but both have benefits.
That's
Yeah.
been my experience for
Yeah.
myself and for my clients. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you can integrate the two, it's just fantastic. You can't go wrong with either one, but it just, yeah, different
Yeah.
teachings. Yeah. So that's great. That's great. Before we get going with our questions, we're going to play a quick game called One for One. I'll give you
Yeah.
a word, and you say the first word that comes to your mind.
Okay.
Yeah. Nothing too crazy. So the first one is hiking.
Boots.
Japan.
Kimono.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And curiosity.
Healing.
Farming.
Was that farming?
Farming, yeah.
Farming. Tractor.
And the last one is generations.
Children.
Yeah, that's it.
Mm.
I saw you spend some time in Japan.
Yeah, I spent 3 years living in Japan.
Yeah. How was that? Good fun?
It was really eye-opening at the time because I came straight out of university. It was my first time, since I started school to not be studying.
Mm.
And I was living in a little expat community because we were all English teachers working for the government. And we were in a place with very few non-Japanese people, really very, very few. So we would get looked at in the street quite a lot. I remember some of the kids touching my skin because they'd never
Especially the
seen...
blonde hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was so different. I remember, just lots of things that were culturally hugely, hugely different to England. And I loved it. I really enjoyed it. That's why I stayed for 3 years. It was a big period of growing up for me.
Yeah, it's exposes you to so much more, like traveling does. Yeah, especially when you go into places with different cultures.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If you embrace it, it's fantastic. But if you don't, then it's a different story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those people usually left after the first year.
Yeah, it's not for me.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on with our question. Let's get going with our questions. So the first one is, what is father wound?
So I was sort of contemplating this whole topic, father wounds, and I was contemplating, very topical at the moment is gender. And what do we mean by father? And what role does the father take in a family unit? Because now there's such a huge variety of family constellations. And sometimes we have two mothers. Sometimes we have a mother and the grandparents are forming the parents. And so I thought it might be really useful at the beginning just to acknowledge how many different different constellations of families there are, number one, but also how different people will express sort of father energy, or what we might think of as male energy. And so, when I think about my kids, my daughter expresses quite a lot of what would be traditionally kind of male energy. She's quite boisterous. She's quite, just different, normally sort of male qualities. And I hold this very loosely. And I know this can be triggering for some people to hear me speak like this.
It's okay.
And my son is very gentle and has much more what would be classed as kind of feminine qualities. So I kind of really want to acknowledge that, that the gender qualities that we've assigned to different genders are actually quite fluid. So for the purpose of this interview, I really wanted to talk about someone who identifies as male and is taking on the father role in the child's life. So often the biological father, but it could also very much be a stepfather, a boyfriend, adoptive father. It could even be an uncle or a grandfather, but mostly for this interview, I'm sort of talking about the people living in the home, so within, with the child.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so back to the original question, a little bit of a side thing there. The father wound is really a relational wound. So it's about kind of how, when we're a child, we're growing up in our culture, mostly we're growing up very intimately with usually two adults, right? Which is quite limited because in the past we would grow up in a much bigger village.
Bigger, yeah.
Totally, right? And you'll know that from your time in Africa. It's quite a different social structure. So we've got two adults that we're really learning about. How do I be in relationship with this person? How am I responded to? When I reach out, do they reach back for me? And, energetically, when I have a bid for connection, do they look at me when I ask for something? Am I annoying to them or am I loved? And so we're really learning about, who am I in the world? Am I worthy of being loved? Am I worthy of being attended to? Or am I an annoying person? Or do I deserve to be neglected and ignored, right? Because children are not able to consider, okay, dad is really stressed at work and has absolutely no capacity for any children. And it doesn't matter that it's me, or it could be the most angelic child on the planet. He would be exactly the same, right? Children can't think like that. So they internalize it and they say, oh, it's me. Dad's left because of me. Dad's sad because of me. So there's a whole period for children where developmentally that's how they feel and think. So back to the original, what are father wounds? It's ruptures in the relationship with the father is a really easy way to put it. And so we can have mother wounds as well, because they're our main, and those are the ones we spoke about this last time. It's often we talk a lot about the relationship with the mother. And that's because it is so fundamental, right? Especially because the mother in our culture does a lot of the caring. Although I'm seeing that shift, and I've got some good friends who the mum has gone to work and the dad's been at home with the kids, and it's worked beautifully. So, so in terms of relational issues and how we learn about ourselves from those two primary adults, yes, often culturally the mom sits at the forefront, but the dad plays a massive role as well, and especially for boys and men, and we'll come to that later.
Yeah, totally, yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that was great. I didn't have any follow-up question from that. My next question is, are there different types? If so, what are the different types?
Yeah. So again, I was thinking about this, and because they're all relational, I sort of felt like there's one common one, which is a lack of. So it's a kind of an abandonment. It's around what was missing.
Yes.
So it might be that dad was absent, that dad was working all of the time. And I'm really aware that for a lot of dads, and so my own father died about 7 years ago at 91, right? So my dad was born in 1925. So my dad was actually fought in the Second World War. So for most people my age, their parents were born to people of that generation. So those people, a lot of the men had gone to war, right? They experienced their country being invaded or having to actually be shipped off and fight. So you have a whole generation of men there who are traumatized in one way or another. You've got separation from family, facing their own immortality, not knowing if they're going to be alive tomorrow, all the trauma that comes with that. So my own father was away for 3 years. I know I've got other clients whose fathers were prisoners of war. Just look at the trauma that sits in the Jewish community from that experience. So we've actually got a lot of trauma that is held in male bodies. And that has come down. It's only 2 generations ago. I think that it's easy to forget that I'm sitting here at 44, and sort of in a more normal family structure, my father would have been raised by somebody who was born in that era.
Yes.
And I was reading, there's a great book called Raising Boys by Steve Biddulph. I don't know if you've ever heard of this book.
Ooh, I haven't heard that one.
He's an Australian author. He's really fantastic. And he is talking about some of that in this book. And he said, shall I just read a bit to you?
Yeah, yeah, please, yeah.
Our father's generation included a few dads, but most men in those days proved their love by working, not by playing. And I was
Totally.
thinking about, yeah, that there was a sense of I'm fulfilling my duty and my role and showing my love to the family through working. But there's no playing, not much cuddling, not much talking to the kids, teaching the kids. And a lot of that stuff was left to the mother. And he was talking about how, compared to the 1960s, fathers are spending on average 600 times more. I hope I've got that right. I was hoping to find that bit in the book and I've lost that bit. But it was like 600 times more time with their children than in the 1960s. And that just made my heart expand. It's like, oh, thank goodness. Because
There's a
I think
shift.
a big shift. And I think
Yeah.
that men are wanting that connection with their kids. I'm seeing that with my clients. They want to be with their children. And I think that for a lot of family units, the men in return are wanted. And that brings about more connection and more love for everybody.
Mm. Mm.
So,
So,
back
yeah,
to your question. Sorry.
yeah,
Are they different? And what are the different types? So one is what was missing. So in that whole generation, it's quite easy to see that what was missing a lot was play, was cuddling, was time with dad, going fishing with dad, playing sport with dad. And some dads, I remember seeing them growing up. When the marriage wasn't going very well, they would spend a lot of time at work because they didn't really want to be with their wife. And when divorce wasn't so easy as it is now, a lot of times dad would just check out of the family
yeah,
unit.
yeah, yeah,
Was what's missing, so the abandonment piece. And then the second is presence and what was done. So it's kind of, it might be the way that you were treated by your father. It could be abuse from the father. And also remembering the relationship between mom and dad, that kids are totally like sponges. And so they're
yeah,
absorbing everything they see and they're learning from dad how to be a man. And so if dad gets really stressed and then has 8 cans of beer, falls asleep on the sofa next to his 8 cans of beer, there's a subconscious message to the child that, okay, that's when I get stressed, that's how adults regulate themselves. They drink 8 cans of beer and fall asleep on the sofa. And so even though the father's never said that to their child, this is how you deal with stress, because they probably think it's a terrible way to deal with stress.
yeah.
And the likelihood is they've watched their own father do the same thing.
So
Yeah.
it's one of those where obviously they're just observing the information. They
Yeah.
might not fully have a full picture of it, but from just observing it, it stays with them. And
Totally.
when they get older, they'll just repeat that same behavior that they've
Yeah.
seen.
Exactly. And one of the later, yeah, and that's how trauma can carry on through generations. Is it's often communicated, not necessarily directly. Sometimes we'll never know our father's trauma. Often it's never spoken, but it will come through in the way that the father behaves, the way that they
Yes.
regulate their own nervous system, in the way that they have connection and relationship with other people. Because remember that a lot of trauma is relational. A lot of the time it's stuff that's done to us.
This is the child observing it and like a sponge taking it all in energetically.
Totally. Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
true. And the father that obviously the father that would have worked a lot. So for him, he's seeing it as that's his role to provide. But
Yeah.
at the same time, the child, well, they're getting fed or whatever, but what they're looking for is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's just a symptomatic of how our culture was set up at the time. It's women were at home when I look at my grandparents, right? So my mom's parents are very and in fact, my parents had the same setup. It was the father went to work and the mom was at home with the kids. So my sister and I are a first generation in our family to be working mothers, and both of us worked part-time. So, and that was by choice for me. I could have worked full-time if I wanted to, but I felt like I would prefer to work part-time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that part of our sort of really rolling off the Victorian era is this setup of, and remember that the 9 to 5 work hour came out of Victorian England when an English gentleman wearing his suit had an army of servants at home. So there wasn't just a woman at home. There was often lots of other people doing the washing and doing the, caring for the kids. And then I guess we roll into the Industrial Revolution, where then a lot of the men go into factories, and women as well. So then we've got a real disturbance of the family system.
Yeah.
But I do like to keep coming back into that kind of us all getting a bit looser around what does a really healthy family system look like. And I really question if 2 adults, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kids is the best structure for children culturally.
And do you think having so for a father that would work quite a lot, when he comes home, obviously not every day is going to be stressed, but how vital is it to have those 2 or 3 hours spending with your kids?
Yeah.
Because not every day you're going to have a stressful day in work. So, and
Yeah,
if you are, I'm sure there's ways you can explain it to them that you don't have the energy, but.
Yeah. So as a parent and somebody who's, working, my personal view is that 9 to 5 is too long for people to be working. Just throw that out there.
Yeah.
I feel like it would be much healthier culturally for us to have shorter work hours, because you've got to put the commute on top of that. So for a lot of parents, you knock off at 5:30, you get home at 6:30. And then a lot of young kids, maybe you've got an hour. And in that time, often they're super cranky up until about 9, 10. They're often super cranky in that hour.
Yeah.
That you're trying to get them fed, you're trying to get them bathed. It's kind of a real missioning time. People who've got young kids will be nodding. Yeah, she gets it.
Yeah.
And so, maybe dad comes in and helps with that. Maybe he helps with putting them to bed. But there can be a little bit of self-sacrifice there of having to actually kind of park, I'm really tired right now and I'd really like this hour to decompress. Some dads find sitting in the car for 5 minutes or so before they go in and just doing a little bit of meditation, just doing a little bit of decompressing, having a chat first, even connecting with mom, and having just a bit of a full body hug, a little bit of a decompress, and then giving time and attention to the kids. And so thinking about that time, often when dad gets home, is missioning time. It's often quite kind of task oriented.
Yeah, it's not.
Isn't quality time. So really often we're looking at quality time more on the weekends. And then it's putting time aside to do special things with them, and doing special things with all of the kids, but also having times when you take off certain children and do certain things with them just one-on-one. I've spoken to a lot of adults whose parents did that, and they really enjoyed that quality time, the one-on-one time with both parents.
Yeah. Not just when you're doing something wrong.
Totally.
You get quality time with dad. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. My next question is, father wounds, what are some of the symptoms?
Yeah, so it's quite a big one as well.
It is.
But really, people who have a father wound, you usually know it. If you say to people, okay, do you feel like it's more father or mother? Some will say straight away, both. It was a disaster. Or they'll say, yeah, my stuff is to do with my father, or yeah, my stuff's to do with my mother. So most people, they kind of know, yeah, my unresolved, unfinished stuff is with my dad. And it's really, whenever there's a wound, it's unresolved and it's painful. Yeah, that's usually the feeling. And it can show up in different ways. It can show up as difficulty expressing emotions, can be difficulty regulating. And when I say regulating, I'm meaning it's difficult to calm ourselves down. So we can get really distressed and it's difficult to calm down. Negative self-belief.
Sorry, is that calming yourself down without stimulation, like without some sort of external?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
look, you know, sometimes a great form of regulation can be having a chat with your best friend. And then there is some kind of connection. But when I do that work with clients, we like to build up a whole suite of resources, some that involve connection with other people and some that we can do on our own, because we can't always rely on other people. So a bit of both, you know. And again, culturally, I think that we've swung a little bit too far to, we have to be able to do everything on our own. We shouldn't need to rely on anybody else, because we've been so afraid of codependence. But actually, there's this lovely sweet spot in relationship where we're interdependent, which means, you know, I do rely on you for things and you rely on me for things. And I'm also able to rely on myself for things and you're able to rely on yourself for things. And I think that in the therapy world, we're moving much more towards, you know, we know that people who are happily in relationships, they live longer, they have stronger immunity, they are able, you know, it's kind of scientifically, we know that humans are hardwired to be in connection because we're tribal. Yeah. If we weren't in connection, we died.
Yeah.
There's a great book actually by somebody called Johan Hari called Lost Connections.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Amazing book. And it's all about being in connection and being connected to others, being connected to meaning.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I think we kind of swung towards more and more towards, I can do it by myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially men as well.
Yeah. That kind of, yes. Yes. Yeah. I agree with that.
Do you think that's obviously going back to your father? Like, if you didn't see him do it, you're probably not going to be doing it yourself. Like, if you didn't see your father like expressing that he needed help, he wanted to do everything himself, fix everything, you probably take on that same mindset.
Yeah, because you're, and again, especially for boys, because there is a stage between 6 and 14. This is, again, something Steve Biddulph talks about. Between 6 and 14, when they will start looking towards the father as a male role model to learn what it means to be male in the world. And so if dad doesn't express his emotions and feels against it and doesn't ask for help, doesn't ever reach out, has to do everything himself, then that's what I absorb as, that's how I be a male. I do everything myself and I don't ask for help.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. My next question is, how do I know if I have father wounds?
Yeah, it's like I said, most people will kind of know, you know. It's also when...
Addressing it is different than knowing.
Sorry?
Addressing the wound is different than knowing. Like, I might say I have father wounds, but I'm probably not going to do anything about it.
Yeah. It's when we kind of look back at that relationship with the father and we know that there was a lack of attunement. We know that we didn't really get our needs met by our father. And there's often outright abuse in the relationship or a sense of, well, where was he? Even with fathers who lived with their children. And
yeah. So, like you're saying, even if you live with a child, you can physically be there, but not really there.
Absolutely. And I see that with a lot of clients. I remember speaking to a client many years ago who said dad started a very big business and she said she just never saw him. And he was in the house, but he worked in an office and she remembers looking through the glass at him at his desk working, and she wouldn't dare go in because Mum had said, "Don't go in, Dad's working." And that's a really strong memory, is looking through the glass of his office, watching him. And in that, you can just feel she wants to go in and talk to him. She wants to sit on his lap. She wants to smell him and feel those big, safe arms around her and feel loved as a girl. And so for women, they're learning about, what does it feel like to be loved by a man? And that is such an important imprint for women who are going to go out into heterosexual relationships. What does it feel like to have a man in a really healthy, unconditionally loving way tell you that you're amazing, that you're smart, that you're beautiful, that you're just special on the inside? So many girls didn't hear anything like that from their fathers.
Yeah, so you grow up, start looking for it outside.
Yeah. And also then it's also for a lot of women, then they will settle for relationships where they don't get that, because they are not used to getting that from men. So if they get that from men as adults, it can feel weird even. Like, why are you saying that stuff to me? It feels totally uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's like, it's like you're seeking something that you don't recognize. Like a part of you seeking that connection, but because you never saw it, and if someone start presenting it to you, it becomes strange.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we will unconsciously look for what we know.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. And thank you. My next question is, what are some of the ways the father would affect men?
Yeah, so there's that. And again, depending on what's happened with the child, between 6 and 14, they're really looking for, how do I be a male in the world? So there can be a bit of confusion around, what does it look like? So one of the ways, especially if the father is completely absent and you're growing up just with mom, one of the ways is bringing into the child's life really strong, beautiful male role models and encouraging the child to go off fishing, go off camping, do cooking and spending time with, doing men's business, whatever that might be, fixing the car, fixing a bike, and spending really good quality time with healthy role models. Okay, so how else does it show up? It's also learning how to be with other males. So I had a friend of mine a few years ago say that he grew up without his father, and said he finds it really easy to be around women and finds it really uncomfortable to be around men. And that for him as an adult male, it was a real growing edge. And he said he'd often sit in groups of men and find that he feels quite self-conscious. He doesn't really know what to say. And, some men, he would kind of say, some men in the group kind of have quite a bravado-y thing going on. And he'd, have to kind of check in, like, well, do I want to be with men and kind of put on this kind of bravado-y thing? Or, and so it was, do you identify with that at all? Or?
Yeah, it's like, you start looking at it like, why do they behave that way? Because he's so used to being around certain groups, and men behave completely different when in a group. So if like that, if you never saw it, you just think like, oh, I don't want to be around these people.
Yeah, and it was super confusing for him, and he did a lot of therapy work around that, and how do I be with men, because he actually just wasn't used to spending time with men. Yeah.
Growing up, yeah. That's a tough one. Tough situation, especially obviously with your best friends and stuff. So you probably might have only one or two friends.
Well, then when then you're learning from boys how to be a man. And the thing is that when you're learning from your friends and from your peers, they don't really know how to be men either. They're exploring, making it up as they go.
Yeah, totally.
Ideally, we want to learn about how to be a loving man from a loving man.
Mm, And if you didn't get that, then that's the ones that you're trying to. That's the ones that left behind.
Yeah. As
Yeah.
well as that relational imprint that I was saying at the very beginning about around what we make it mean about us. You know, Dad wasn't able to love me. Like I knew he didn't love me. He hardly looked at me. He would ignore me. He never spent any time with me. For a
Mm,
child, well, I know my dad didn't love me. Now, for the dad, he might sit in therapy 20 years later in floods of tears with huge regret and a sense of loving his child so much and actually not being able to show the child love because of their own stuff, their own
they'll
pain, their
focus
own,
on. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And it can be a real mismatch, like, and in a way, like such a painful story where the child feels absolutely not loved. And the father loves the child and just doesn't have that language to communicate it, a love language to communicate it to the child.
So
And
for
I
the
think
father,
that's,
yeah. Sorry.
yeah. I was going to say, I think that version is very common.
Obviously, for the father, he's bringing with him what he learned from his father.
Yeah.
So there's not really it's not a blame. It's
No,
more, yeah.
exactly. It's exactly what's been learnt.
Mm.
Yeah.
And do you think with that, for a child who feels loveless, for example, by his father, who's always there but just doesn't feel it, do you think they still have to have that mindset that I had a great dad to maintain the relationship and the connection?
I don't think we have to. Often it's sort of two parts. There's one part
Mm,
that says, I had a great dad. He went to work. He financially supported our family. He was always there for mom. And he provided, which is important that there's, because it gives security, which is one of the needs of a child, provides
mm,
security. Dad provides security and a sense of stability. And on the other hand, I wanted more from him and I feel a sense of lack. So it's kind of holding both.
And do you find that, sorry, this is not one of the questions. Do you think for men that lack is a more men addressing it or just kind of avoiding the lack?
I think for many men, it's, you mean the father or the son?
The son.
Yeah. I think that there is a general tendency to repeat the pattern. So just to do what we've learnt.
Mm,
And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited by all the personal development that people are doing. Like people like Tony Robbins, that kind of coaching style attracts a lot of men. I see more men coming into therapy, and lots of families coming in and doing family therapy, where the men get to really reflect on, actually, I'm doing what I feel is the right thing to do, which is society. And my father has said, the role model of my father plus society said, go to work, get a good job, make sure my family is secure and financially supported. That's my main job. And then if I can keep my wife happy and keep my kids happy as a sideline, then I'm good. And I think societally, we're starting to shift that and starting to put wife and kids and relationship more in the
forefront.
center. Yeah. I mean, do you feel that, or how does it feel to you?
Slowly going that way, I think, which is great. I think
Mm.
to bridge that gap, we need to have more men going to therapy because like 10, 15 years ago,
Yeah.
It was very difficult. Well, it's still very difficult now because you're dealing with a generation that didn't really see their fathers go therapy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a lot of, it's a big gap for them to take that step. So if this generation start going to therapy and start having those conversations with the kids, that's how we'll be able to make that change. But current generation, I think the people are trying, but there's still a lot of shame that
Mm.
that comes with it. Because you associate therapy with like, oh, I don't want to talk about my problems, so called, and
Mm.
you associate it with people crying, and a lot of men would have grew up with the belief that you don't cry. So it's like,
Mm.
why do I want to go there?
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, why
And
do I
so,
want to go there?
yeah. And so a lot of men come into therapy because their wives send them.
Yeah.
And then
It's like, I
you need
booked you that
therapy,
appointment.
so yeah, they book the appointment.
Yeah.
And then some will drop out pretty quickly, or some kind of will have a good experience and kind of go, actually, that's really helpful. You know, I can see how that's
Mm,
helpful. Some men come into therapy because their kids feel so that their kids start to show behaviors that need attention,
mm,
and they know that the whole family need to focus on it.
yes.
That's another way in. And sometimes it's a matter of hitting rock bottom where, it's kind of, I'm actually
Crisis.
really not okay. Yeah, a crisis. I've lost my job. I've lost my identity. I'm getting divorced, that kind of stuff. But I was watching an American comedian the other night. She's like in her early 20s, and she was talking about going to therapy, and she shouted out to the audience, massive audience. She was like, I was talking to my therapist the other day, and she goes, who goes to therapy? She goes, shout if you go to therapy. And honestly, like 90% of the audience put up their hand and went, woo!
Yeah.
And I just thought, and so she's in her early 20s, so she's probably attracting an audience early 20s to maybe early 40s.
Mm,
But, and it was in America where therapy is more common
yes.
than maybe in England and Australia. But again, it's like, yep, it's coming into the language. Yeah, I think there's a way
It
to
is.
go
Yeah.
still,
It
but
is. Yeah. But like that, for men, there could be five of them attending therapy, but they'll never talk about it.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
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 But like, I'm not bringing that conversation up. But yeah, sorry. My next question. Oh, this is, what are some of the impact growing up in a fatherless home can have?
Mm. So it's that stuff we kind of keep touching on, is about learning how to be a man, and what it also having it role modeled. How does a loving, healthy man have a loving, healthy relationship with a woman or with anyone?
Mm,
But the kids are watching their parents. And so he's watching, how does my dad treat my mother? And that's a big lesson about that men carry on into life around how to treat women in an intimate relationship.
mm.
And
And
another thing that can happen when the father is completely absent is that sometimes the boy is learning about men from the mother.
mm,
And sometimes the mother will have had really horrible experiences with men. So she might hold a view that, well, all men are X, Y,
yeah.
and Z. And she might be very verbal about that.
Mm,
And obviously that's really confronting for the boy, because he's also a boy. He's a male.
mm. So you're kind of putting that imprint on him.
Yeah.
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 Based on your own experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in those cases, even if you say for the female, if she's had a not so good experience,
Mm.
it's important not to kind of display it out there for the child to. You have to kind of keep that to yourself.
Yeah. And the main thing is trying to bring in healthy, loving men for the child to spend time with.
Mm.
male or female child, doesn't,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
gender neutral child, any child. It's kind of the more loving, supportive, healthy relationships a child has, the stronger the child will be. And research just
Totally.
backs that up over and over and over again. So, bringing forward, and not only men, but also, I'm just keep talking about men because we're talking about the fathers,
Yeah.
but, aunts and grandmothers but loving, healthy adults who will bring the child in as their own. Like, I love how in the Aboriginal culture in Australia, it's Auntie Maggie, Auntie, Sue, Uncle Joe. And so everybody has the beginning of their name is Auntie and Uncle. And a friend of mine who grew up in an Aboriginal community said, someone who's part of the community but who is not related to you at all will absolutely dress you down if you're up to no good. They will
Yeah.
absolutely tell you to get out of that house, put that thing down and get back home,
Totally.
Yeah, and that there's
Yeah.
communal caring, communal disciplining, and that there's lots of aunties and uncles. And so I think that that's a very powerful thing for all parents in all family systems, family units to be really thinking about is how do we bring in different role models for our kids? And as a mother myself, it's something I'm often thinking about is I'm one flavor of woman, of person, and I have friends and people who are close to me who are a different flavor of person and have, I've got a friend who's a great surfer. I can hardly swim. And so they can learn surfing from that person. I've got another great friend who's a really great cook and they can learn those things from that person. I'm a terrible cook, So
Really?
it's
Jesus.
kind of, when we come together, our kids can learn what it feels like, not only skills, but also how those couples interact with each other. Maybe they're more loving than me and my husband, or maybe they're a bit less loving, and they just get to see different patterns and they get to think, actually, I really like how mum and dad do that. Or actually, I really prefer how, Emma and Sam do that. Or, and they get to kind of start to make choices about, actually, I really like that way as opposed to this way.
Yeah, so it's more around expanding the circle, if you like, because like that you mentioned in certain cultures, even people not from your birth family can still treat you like you are from that, and you would treat them like you would treat your dad. So it brings in that kind of different learning from different people that just learning from, say, one or two parents, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And that's a potluck game, isn't it? Because we get born into with two parents, and how do you know if you're going to get a healthy set or a pretty dysfunctional set? It's kind of so there's like a protective factor if we grow up in a community like that, because if your parents are quite dysfunctional in many ways and really not great role models, then maybe you choose to spend a bit less time with them and you spend a bit of time with safer adults. So it can be quite protective. And I mean, that used to happen. I mean, I remember adults talking to me who grew up around that war era, and they would often say, oh yeah, well, Sam basically grew up in our house. And I would kind of go, oh, what do you mean he grew up in your house? And this is England. And they would say, well, it wasn't great in Sam's house. There was never any food and it was a bit violent. And so basically he just slept at our house. And there was a lot of that happened in that time. And I don't know how it is in England now. Well, I mean, I grew up in England. When I grew up in England, that wasn't happening. Children pretty much stayed in their own homes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think there was a lot more fluidity, even just 2 generations ago, where if stuff was going on that was pretty really uncomfortable for the child in their home, they would kind of float off and
Yeah,
stay in other,
somewhere else. Yeah,
basically be raised by other people. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think we're losing some of that as well, which is a shame.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah. And sorry, my next question is, how
mm.
does fatherhood impact my adult relationship?
So I love
So
the
let's
word that,
say,
mm,
sorry, say that again.
yeah, you go.
So this
Sorry.
is where I've had we say, an absent father, and
Yeah.
so I'm missing a lot of connection, emotional connection, and I become an adult, and now it's impacting my relationship. But I don't obviously know that.
Mm, mm. So I always come back to that attachment piece and the sense of, am I worthy of being loved?
Mm,
And I think that the core danger with having a totally absent father is a sense that I'm not lovable. And I think that we carry that then, or I see people carry that into their adult relationships as almost like a core wound and a
mm,
core belief of, deep down, even though I've got a good job, and even though I'm loving in some ways, and even though deep down I feel like I'm not really lovable,
mm,
and that plays out in different ways in adult relationships. But yeah, I think that that's often a core thing that people are walking around with.
mm, mm. So you enter relationships, you have the feeling, but consciously you don't express the feeling. So tend to think
Yeah.
that it's people causing you the pain.
Yeah. The other thing that can be set up is kind of an abandonment wound
Mm,
where you're very sensitive to your partner leaving, a lot of fear around partner leaving. So it's
mm,
basically kind of triggered by abandonment stuff. And I always say that as an adult in relationship, if you're seeing some of this stuff come up in your relationship, couple counseling can be really powerful. Sitting in a space with a third person and hearing what's going on for each other and
mm,
developing new strategies to communicate and to behave and learning how to love each other in the way that each other need to be loved. You know, if we don't have examples of how to do that in our childhood, it can be really hard to just make it up because we don't have a felt experience of what that's like. And we don't have any
mm,
languaging for it. We don't know what the exchanges look like. It can be so helpful. I can't emphasize it enough that where you get sort of taught different strategies of actually how to be in a relationship, even when people have had pretty good role modeling, it's still super, super helpful.
mm,
You just
mm,
learn so much about each other, you know, like, I mean, I've done couple counseling myself and I realize, you know, like sometimes we'll be going over something that happened, like an exchange. And from my side, I think that he's thinking X, Y, Z because
yeah.
his face looks like that and his behavior was like that. And then in therapy, he might say, actually, I was experiencing A, B, and C. And they are so far apart from each other. I'm like, wow, okay. I was absolutely completely wrong. But that's such great information for me because it might be
mm,
that in that moment he looked and felt angry, but actually in that moment he was actually feeling really vulnerable. And so
mm,
I responded to the anger, you know, but actually he was really feeling vulnerable and actually needed me to respond to the vulnerability. And that's very common with men. It's more often men will express anger over sadness or vulnerability because culturally we've said
yeah.
it's not really cool for men to cry, which is
No,
just
no.
madness.
I think a lot of men, well, I think default is anger.
Yeah. Well, we have like sadness, anger, and fear
Fear. Yeah.
and glad. They're the four main emotional core emotions. And men are allowed to express two of them, anger and happy, glad. Generally not allowed to express fear and not allowed to express sadness. And for women, often they have repressed anger because culturally it's not,
You
women are
know.
not supposed to be angry,
Great.
but
Yeah.
we're allowed to be sad or afraid or happy. So at
Yeah.
least women get three of them. We get three of the four, but men only get two.
Yeah. Yeah. You often, you even see that with men, and say, for example, sports, and they're feeling sad about the team not winning. But to their partner, they might express it as anger.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, don't ask me any questions.
Yeah.
Because they can't express the sadness. Not that they
Yeah.
can't, they don't know how to express it. So
Yes.
they might be feeling it, but they don't know how to express it. So it's default back to anger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Great. So I have two more questions for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to this one. So the feeling of abandonment that a child experiences when a father leaves. How do we start working on that?
So are we talking about
So we're talking about, say,
with the child?
So we're talking about, say, in a relationship, the father leaves the family home, and obviously the child doesn't really understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But they do feel abandoned.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that carries on throughout their adult life.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's step back to it happening as a child. Okay. So the number one thing is to try and keep the connection as much as you can. So even if the father moves out, to still have a really regular, and look, I'm bracketing this with if it's safe to be with the father. Yeah.
So the father is, we go with that. Yeah.
A safe person.
Yeah.
So assuming that he is a safe person, then making sure that there's time on the weekend, like a big segment of time where the father gets to be with the children. The other thing is, as much as possible, trying to maintain at least a level of cordiality between mom and dad. Now, I mean, if you're going through a separation process, there's often, big feelings. And one of the key things is not to share that with the children. So especially, and mothers are often more guilty of this, but being really mindful to not share stuff that's going on in the relationship with the child, and for the mother to maintain that relationship as best as she can between the father and the children. And then open communication. So talking about the child as honestly as possible about what is going on. And it might sound like, that mom and dad have, like how in the playground you really, really love playing with Sam, and you find it quite challenging playing with Jemima. Well, mum and dad have started to find that at the beginning it was like playing with Sam, but now it's just feeling really hard, and it's a bit like living with Jemima. And so mum and dad have just, we love you two so much, and we're always here for you. And you can call dad whenever you want. And explaining it, taking them to the new house where dad's going to be living, setting up a sleeping space for them so that they can stay and have sleepovers at dad's house as well. And so a separation process between adults is best done in therapy with somebody who, as a third party, who can give advice around how best to structure it for your particular circumstance. Now, it might be, let's give an example where like dad's had an affair, mom's super angry, doesn't even want to see dad. So we've got to manage that in a way where it doesn't affect the kids too much. And so there might be a very quick changeover with the kids. And so a therapist can really help with that stuff. And it might only be 3, 4, 5 sessions that you have as a couple, but working out that separation process, especially when children is involved, is so fundamental. I've got, I know a couple who in Australia, apparently this is a Canadian way of doing it. What they did when they separated is they kept the family house and the children stayed in the family house, and they rented an apartment nearby, and mum and dad, it was just a studio, and mum and dad alternated who slept in the studio. And so they would do 1 week on, 1 week off. So the kids stayed in the house and the parents would be with dad for a week and mum would stay in the apartment, and then they switched and dad would be in the apartment and mum would be in the house. And they did that for quite a long time. They did that. And then as the kids got older, they got their own places. So there's lots of different ways of separating. And it can be really good to actually really think that through so that the kids are protected as much as possible. That was a very long answer. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. In the event like all that good stuff doesn't happen.
In the event that good stuff doesn't happen.
Yeah.
As an adult, I mean, doing the work, right, which is for me is going to therapy and talking about your experiences and unpacking them. And what can happen in therapy? You think, well, how is therapy going to change, what I experienced in my childhood? So if I were a man who knows that they have father stuff, who knows that they have very little role modeling around and they feel uncomfortable with men, like that example I gave earlier, what I would do is I would look for a male therapist, probably around my dad's age, because there'll be transference that happens that will be helpful. So like when I was working on some of my father's stuff, I purposefully went to a male therapist around my dad's age. And when I was sat in therapy with him, it was the weirdest thing because my dad was very old. And my therapist also had grey, white hair. But sometimes, and he was probably a good 30 years younger than my actual dad, sometimes my dad's face would I would be looking at him and I'd see my dad's face sit over him, would be the weirdest thing. So, but what happened in that space for me is that I was able to have intimate and vulnerable conversations with him and get a different response from a male than I was able to get, than my dad was able to give. And I think actually my dad would have loved to have been able to do it. He just didn't have the skills to do it. And so in that space, we have what's called a missing experience. And so there's that little child in me that's really wanting that connection and is having the experience now of being able to have that connection. And that's how healing can happen with the younger self and the present self. And even, going, I mean, sometimes I would turn up and just say to him, I feel like I need some fatherly advice and my dad isn't here. Can I chat to you about X, Y, and Z? And he'd say, sure, let's chat about that. And just having him as a healthy, stable, loving, he was a Buddhist practitioner. So he did a lot of sort of mindfulness Buddhist practices. It was very healing for me in many ways around my relationship with my dad.
It doesn't always have to be the big stuff.
No.
Yeah. And you get there when you're ready to get there.
Yeah.
Super. I have one more question in relation to this. How does unresolved father trauma become the children's trauma?
So it's passed down through the relational dynamics and how we see our father get dysregulated. So get angry and not be able to control it. Mental health issues as well. Like there's a lot of talk about how they get passed down. And again, I think a lot of it comes down to You know, how did I see my dad deal with his sadness? How were emotions expressed in my house? Were they allowed to be expressed? Were they like vomited everywhere and it was just messy? Or was there like no emotion and everything shut down? And both can be unhealthy. Yeah. It's kind of, but again, we learn how to be human as we're growing up in that. I always see it like a little box. We're in a little box with a mom and a dad, and we're in this kind of hothouse of this is how we're learning to be human. And so a lot of the trauma is passed down in behavior. How do I get punished? How do I get disciplined? How is love given? And when is it given? And when is it withdrawn? All of that stuff is learnt through osmosis.
Most of this wouldn't be passed down through words. Or is it more behavior and
it's much more behavior, because when we've experienced, when a person has experienced trauma, it gets held in the nervous system and in the body. And it often means that we're in a state of dysregulation quite often. And it can be quite hard to come back down into a calmer state by ourselves. And that patterning, like I described it to one person once as like for me, when I got older, I realized that I had grown up with a background of constant anxiety.
Yeah.
And that's often an intergenerational trauma thing of we're not really safe. We can't ever really switch off because we're not really safe, which in my context makes total sense because my dad wasn't safe in his own childhood. He moved around a lot. There was a lot of poverty. He wasn't really safe. And so, you know, there was a lot of like making sure the doors are locked. There were very few other people around. And I can so see, especially as a trauma therapist, how my dad's trauma impacted how he was as a father and, yeah, just how he was and just all those little things that I thought as a kid he was crazy. I'm like, Dad, why did you keep locking? We had, I'm not joking, we had 4 locks on our front door. And I would look around our house and be like, Dad, we've got nothing to take. Like, what are they going to take? Probably the most expensive thing is a secondhand TV. You know, like what?
Yeah.
Why? But that was his trauma. Yeah, it was.
So that kind of the anxiety he had is at the time you didn't know, but you picked it up as well.
Yeah, and a lot of kids do, especially in their teenage years. You know, some kids will completely rebel and just kind of, and a lot of kids will look at their parents and make very strong vows of, I am not going to be like that. I am not going to be what my father did to my mother. I am not going to, you know, and they get really clear and they carry that through and they completely change just through their own will. They just go, I am just not going to do that. And that does happen with some people, but more common than not is to repeat the same pattern.
Cycle, yeah. And when working with father wounds, you don't necessarily, like if you want to work on your father wounds, you don't necessarily have to address the father, do you? Or you can just say, do it through. You don't need to start making the phone calls and be like, you were never there for me.
No. I mean, you might want to as part of your own healing process, but it would be more, not in a blamey way. It would be more in a curious way. It would be more, it would sound more like, you know, Dad, sometimes when I think about my childhood, you know, I feel sad that I didn't feel like you were around that much. And I just wonder, like, what was that like for you? So it's more kind of, I want to get to know you and understand why you were the way you were. And those conversations can be very healing and very enlightening. And I had some of those conversations with my dad before he died. And it gave me a lot of insight into his own mental health. And he shared some mental health struggles. And he told me that when I was in my late 30s, and he'd never told me. And it
Prior to that.
gave me a lot more context for who he was as a person and why he was the way he was.
Mm.
And I knew that there was for him a lot of regret around it, you know?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
felt that as we were talking. So there's a potential for a lot of healing, but not really because when we come at it with, you know, you didn't turn up to one of my soccer games, you didn't, you know, you didn't, da, 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 da. Of course, the other person goes on the defensive,
Yeah.
right? And then often we just play out the same pattern. You know, you attack me, I get defensive. And there's often not a lot of healing in there.
No. No.
So it's when can come at it from you know, like, this was my experience, and, you know, or even not even sharing your experience. It might sound like, you know, I was just thinking about my childhood, and I just remembering you being really angry quite a bit. And I just wondered, especially when, you know, between like 12 and 14, and I just wondered what was going on for you at that time. Do you remember that? Now, some parents will deny it. They'll just go, don't remember it, don't know what you're talking about, never happened, you know. And some parents will be kind of ready to talk about it. But we absolutely don't have to have those conversations. We can do the work ourselves. And again, I highly recommend with another person, because the father wound is a relational wound. So working on it, we're in relationship with somebody else. It allows us, we learn to be vulnerable in the space, and we learn what it feels like to be held by another person.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. It was interesting.
Thank you. I have two unrelated questions to this. My first one is, this is not related to fatherhood, so this is just for you. And if you were in therapy, could you describe your ideal therapist?
I am in therapy, so I'll just say that straight out, because I feel that the healing journey is a forever journey. And I also feel that for me as a therapist, it's important for me to be consistently getting therapy so that I have the experience of being on the other side all the time, and pushing myself to be more vulnerable, and also pushing myself to see the stuff that I'm not conscious of. Because some of it, like, I know my stuff, but then some of it, like, I don't even know what I don't know. Like, might be really obvious to you, but I've got no idea.
Yes, like, do I do that? No, I don't.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So first up, I am in therapy, and have been for the last like 20 years, and I imagine I will be till I die. I hope so. So at the moment, I'm seeing a somatic experiencing practitioner, because I'm studying somatic experiencing and I want to get to know that better. And I'm actually I have a very strong relationship with my husband. I'm really lucky. I'm lucky, and we work on it. And we've had couple counseling. We had it sporadically, like about 5 years ago, we had a little bit. And we're about to start to do another piece of couple counseling. And again, because I'm going to be studying some couple counseling modalities. So my ideal therapist changes.
Depending on what you're studying.
What I'm studying and what I want to learn about. But it has to be somebody who's very heart-centered, somebody where there's a rapport, someone who I feel like I can giggle with and be a little bit naughty with, because I do have a playful side.
Yeah, you need that.
Yeah, where you can kind of laugh together about, you know, I was having these horrible thoughts about myself, and, you know, we can kind of laugh at myself. So I guess it's a foundation of trust.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, totally. And my very last question is, what do you like to do for fun?
I I really like to go to the beach, actually. I love to lay in the sun and play Sudoku on the beach with my kids. That's
Yeah.
one of my favorite things to do. I love hiking. That's something, and being in nature.
Mm,
Uh, I live more, yeah, there's bits of nature around where I am, but I grew up more in the countryside. So
yeah.
sometimes I need that countryside fix. So anything kind of in nature, yeah, laying in the sun with my kids playing Sudoku, that's probably one of my favorites.
Yeah. Sweet.
Yeah.
Sweet.
And
Thank you
you?
very much.
What do you do for fun?
Oh, this is what I do for fun.
Mm,
This is my hobby.
yep.
Mm,
What is it about it
mm.
that you love?
About doing this,
Mm,
just I just like to hear people's stories. I like to understand why people do what they do.
mm,
um, and just to hear people's story and see what they've been through, good or bad. Well, I don't see them as good as I don't see stories as good or bad. I just see them as stories.
mm.
Um, and everyone has a story to tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone has a story to tell. So I really, yeah, I really enjoy the conversations.
Mm,
And yeah, I didn't think I'd still be doing it this long, but I think I'm just like it's like for these kind of episodes, like the more I know, the more I want to know.
mm, mm.
Mm. Especially like when you're talking about trauma, it's just like it's just a hole that never gets you never get to the end of. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you so much for the
yeah.
conversation, James. I really love
Thank
your
you.
warm nature, like your warmth comes through in your voice and in the way that you are.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And yeah, it's only 7 o'clock for you, 20 past 7.
Yep, 20 past
So
7, breakfast time.
yeah, I never get used to these time zones. Yeah. And
Have you ever tried have you ever tried
sorry.
have you heard of EFT, emotional freedom? It's like tapping, where you tap certain points on the body.
Yes, I've heard of it, but I don't really know much about it. I just see like people do it like tap this, tap that. I'm like, what am I doing?
I have to
What is
send
it
you a
doing?
thing online. They have like a sheet, and you basically go through these sort of tapping points, and
Mm.
you can do like a little short course on it. It's pretty easy. And I found public speaking really, really hard. Like most therapists are introverts, right? Like most therapists are, number one, wounded, because that's why we go into therapy. And number two, um, often introverted, because much more kind of self-reflective, much more. And so for a lot of therapists, public speaking is really super challenging.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I did a lot of tapping around it that I found helpful. So anyway, if you ever feel like looking that up, it's called EFT tapping. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
certain order, and you say an affirmation as you do it. But yeah,
And is it just kind of helping you to regulate yourself?
it helps to. The idea is that you're tapping on certain pressure points on certain meridians, and so it sounds like I still totally love and accept myself, even though I'm feeling really nervous and I'm not sure what I'm going to say. I still love and accept myself, even when I'm public speaking and I'm feeling really nervous. I still love and accept myself completely, even though I'm feeling really nervous about public speaking and doing this interview. And then you go through the tapping points saying the same thing. So it's like you're
Mm.
putting a program into each meridian. I just found it really effective. Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
And you can do the
Mm.
same with like anxiety or worry, or you can use any topic you want, you know.
And do you do that for like a minute or two,
Yeah, just like a minute
and
or two, and just go through all the points.
then you're ready to go? Okay, yeah, I must check that out. I definitely
Yeah.
need something like that.
Yeah. Anyway, we
Yeah.
just have a chat and all good. Any mistakes we can edit out, right?
Yeah. It's only the start. Then after that, I'm ready to go. Okay. So, if you enjoyed today's episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a quick review on my Facebook page, Don't Be Afraid to Talk, or DM me on Instagram. The show notes will include all of the relevant links from today's episode. If you haven't already, please download, leave a rating, and share with your friends. You might just reach that person who needs to hear this message. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I am James Lumumba, signing off with gratitude.